Chromosomes. Little strands of nucleic acids and proteins are the fundamental genetic instructions that tell us who we are at birth. Most people are born with 46 chromosomes, but each year in the United States, about 6,000 people are born with an extra chromosome, making them a person with Down syndrome. If you've ever encountered someone with Down syndrome, you know that they are some of the kindest, most joyful people you will ever meet. They truly have something extra. My name is Lisa Nichols, and I have spent the last 24 years as both the CEO of Technology Partners and as the mother to Allie. Allie has something extra in every sense of the word. I have been blessed to be by her side as she impacts everyone she meets. Through these two important roles as CEO and mother to Allie, I have witnessed countless life lessons that have fundamentally changed the way I look at the world. While you may not have an extra chromosome, every leader has something extra that defines who you are. Join me as I explore the something extra in leaders from all walks of life and discover how that difference in each of them has made a difference in their companies, their families, their communities, and in themselves. On today's show, I'm privileged to talk with Dr. Richard Lytle. Rick is the president and CEO of the CEO Forum. He holds a PhD from Arizona State and was dean of Abilene Christian University College of Business Administration for 17 years. Well, Rick, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. We've grown to love you and your family, and you're the CEO of an organization that Greg and I are very passionate about, CEO Forum. So let's just talk a little bit. I would like for you to talk about your upbringing.
Well, a little bit of unique upbringing. Grew up in Detroit, Michigan, during the race riots. I remember that vividly as a young guy. There's a lot of stories to that, but I would say the most unique thing was I was raised by a set of parents who lost their hearing at about 12 months old. And so I grew up in a deaf household with a mom and dad, both deaf, and then two other brothers who were hearing. All three of us boys were hearing. And that particular experience, some might have seen as a handicap. I never saw it that way. And what's interesting today, as I look back, I think the only difference between my parents and other folks is that their handicap is much more evident. We all have them, but theirs was very easy to spot. And out of that came a variety of experiences and blessings for me and our family as we grew up, and challenges because of their limitations. So I grew up in Detroit, went to high school there, and then from there I met the bride of 37 years as of today, and great
Jeannie.
Story there, which I won't go into. Jeannie is her name. Jeannie
yes.
McCormick was her maiden name. But 5 years in pursuing her, Lisa, she just wasn't as excited about this marriage thing as I was. And maybe that's why I got a PhD.
You stuck with it, though.
I did. And maybe it's why I got a PhD in marketing, because I thought, this sales, it's not working. So anyway, we've been very blessed, 37 years. And then we followed our graduate education across the United States. We have lived for most of our married lives in Texas. We have three daughters. Kelly's 28, Hannah is 26, and Michelle's 25. And for most of my life, I've been a college faculty person, dean of a business school, consultant, speaker kind of guy. And Jeannie's got a couple of master's degrees. So education was a big thing for us. And our children have been blessed to be fairly well educated into the graduate realm as well.
And we'll get back to some other questions, but
Yep.
You just welcomed a little boy into
We
your
did.
family.
Tatum Lytle Smiley was born July 14th, one day after my dad's birthday, which I was hoping he'd be born there, but he wasn't. But yeah, he's been a great blessing, and they're doing well down in Houston.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to your parents. So tell us a little bit about how your mom and dad, and what was their approach to, here they're raising three boys, but talk a little bit about your dad with Ford Motor Company. What was their approach to life? How did they get through that limitation?
I would say, first of all, a lot of people around them, great sets of parents who paved the way for them in a lot of settings and a lot of challenges that they would experience. But also, I would say, a very simple faith in God. Mom was educated at the 8th grade, Dad 11th grade. That's as high as they could go back then. And there would never have been a time in my all-adult life of Mom and Dad ever sitting down with me and sort of teaching me Bible lessons or anything like that, because they didn't have, in essence, the capacity to do that from an educational learning standpoint. Mm-hmm. But their simple faith stood out in the way they approached life. I never heard my mom and dad complain about being deaf. Never. Never,
and they
never,
could
never.
have.
They were In fact, let me tell you, Lisa, one Christmas, I remember this very well with my dad. It was right near Christmas, maybe Christmas Eve or the day before. Cold in Michigan, grew up in Detroit, and we were going Christmas shopping. And I can't remember for who, but I remember it was a cold day, and Dad and I were out. And I was probably 13, and so I was starting to develop a bit of a sensitivity to folks who needed help. And so there was a guy panhandling, and he had a little sign that said, "I'm a deaf mute," and he had his beanie out, and he wanted some money. And I had a paper out at the time, and I had money, and I was convicted to help this guy. And so I reached in my pocket, and I went to give something in the guy's hat, and my dad just grabbed my arm, ripped it down to my side, and said, "He can work."
He knew
Yes.
that he
And
could
so-
work because
so
he had.
I put
right?
that back in my pocket. I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
I don't understand this right now, but
Right.
okay. We'll go on. But there were a lot of challenges in the home. But let me tell you their story.
Yes,
Let me
please
tell you the
do.
story that's very unique. And if we want to go after that,
Yes.
we can. So on my mom's side, my mom was about 12 months old. She came down with scarlet and rheumatic fevers, and she lost her hearing. Her eardrums are broken. So from 12 months on, she never heard a sound. She was born in Tennessee, dirt floor, one room, Tennessee cabin, with a great mom and dad, but they lost, a lot of people died because this fever came through, and she lost relatives and didn't understand all that. When she was 7 years old, she needed schooling, but it was during the Depression time, and my grandfather, Pop, he didn't know what to do, and he didn't know how to feed the family. And I have writings of his, handwritten notes of him about his faith in God and how he did not know how he was going to feed them the next day. But he traveled to Michigan because he heard Ford was hiring. And he went and got a job at Ford Motor Company in order to get my mom up to Detroit because there was a day school for the deaf in Detroit. And so he did that, and he would go back and forth with the family. But my mom finally entered school at 7 years old, and she said she felt odd. She didn't know she was deaf until she was 7. Like, she didn't have that, because she just knew she said, "I didn't even know there was sound. I would see people's lips moving, but my lips moved." So she had no concept that she was any different than watching other people's, it's just this fascinating thing. So she got up there, he got her in school, and then eventually was able to move the family up there. But the story that I'll share is in the 8th grade, so she was at the kind of the top of her educational, she was valedictorian of the 8th grade, at Detroit Day School.
Wow.
But back then, people, there was a slogan as I was growing up that people would use to describe my mom and dad, and that is they were deaf and dumb. Now, dumb can mean silent or muted, but most of the time it meant in that culture, they're dumb, they're ignorant, they have no brain, they have no real use to society. So we have pictures of my mom. She was very gifted and worked real hard, and they took her all through the state of Michigan and Illinois, and in front of state legislators, were trying to prove to state legislators that deaf people are smart, they can function in society, they can add value to our society. And so Mom would literally close her eyes, put her hand on the throat of her teacher, while another little boy was pointing to the words on the easel, and the teacher would read the words, and my mom, with her eyes closed, would feel on her throat and tell you what she was saying. It's phenomenal. So my mom and dad use total communication. They were brought up that way, where they sign, and they do speak. If you listen to them, you probably would wonder what's going on.
Articulation is not there, right.
And they read lips, so they were able to use all three of those. So that's a bit of Mom's story to that point. My dad grew up in Detroit, a little bit higher socioeconomic status. His dad was a Detroit police officer, but he lost his hearing around 3 years old. They're not exactly still sure. I never knew. My dad never knew how he lost his hearing. Some of that was because people didn't communicate with the deaf, even parents. They were kind of left out of the conversation because nobody knew how to talk to them.
Right.
As the story went, Henry Ford, Sr., Dearborn, Michigan, came into the Detroit Day School for the Deaf, and my dad was in the 7th grade, and Henry Ford came in and talked through an interpreter to all of the boys that were in the class, and he made a promise to them, and he said, "If you will finish the 11th grade and get an education at Detroit Day School for the Deaf, you come and see me, and I'll give you a job at Ford Motor Company." My dad clung to that.
He took it to heart,
He took it to heart, and that drove him, and after he was done the 11th grade, he and his mom went down, he applied, and as far as we know, he was the first deaf person ever to work at Ford Motor Company. So that's an exciting story. So he became a journeyman, he apprenticed in the factory and all that kind of stuff. Well, he met my mom, and they started dating a little bit, and he thought, okay, this might get serious, and it did, and they got married. But my dad, first of all, he knew that getting a job at Ford as a blue-collar factoryman was a blessing, but he wanted more.
He had a dream.
He did. And he wanted to be a white-collar worker which back in those days meant you're an office worker, you wore a tie, and you had a white shirt, which means you weren't in the factory. And he thought, that's the guy I want to be. But he just thought, that's impossible. It was almost impossible that he got a job at Ford in the factory. He signed up for trade school, and it was an engine design, drafting kind of trade school. And so he went for 4 years, 2 or 3 nights a week. And back then, they didn't have interpreters. So Dad said, I just saw the back of the guy's head. Because, they're writing on the chalkboard all night. And so he's worked a shift, he's in this class. And then he said after class, he would have to go up and just kind of try to ask the teacher to write down some stuff. He didn't know what he was talking about. So he did that for 4 years. He failed on the final exam his senior year. He told me that was probably one of the most discouraging times in his life. But after a little bit of pouting and kind of getting through that, his mother took him by the ear and marched him back down to that trade school, and he re-enrolled for his last year, passed with an 80%. And one of my favorite pictures that I have is it's a picture of my dad in a white collared shirt and tie in the world headquarters drafting design room at Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan. First deaf white-collar man ever to be in that position. Phenomenal story.
Trailblazer.
When he retired, 42 and a half years, never missed a paycheck. When he retired, he was a supervisor, and he had 26 men working for him. And his boss told me one time when I was looking at colleges, he said, if your dad was hearing, I'd be working for him. My dad was a very kind, humble guy. Nothing, quote-unquote, special about him, but a simple faith in God and a belief that he could achieve this dream, and he just went for it. That was a platform then for my dad to be able to help his deaf friends. So they watched Dad go to Ford and be a journeyman and be a blue-collar worker, and then they watched my dad become a white-collar worker, and so they followed in his footsteps. Most of the deaf friends that I grew up as a boy being around were all white-collar people who were working
at
for Ford,
Motor
GM,
Company.
or Chrysler, the
Right.
big three back
Right.
then. And largely, it was because of my dad's and mom's example to these people. And then for me, what even takes it more than that is my mother's father thought, well, they need to have a church home. And so he went searching the United States for a deaf preacher, which those didn't exist.
Right.
But by God's grace, he found a deaf preacher, brought him to Michigan. They started in Detroit, a deaf congregation. And so then, because of Mom and Dad's influence, they just started inviting their friends to church. And they had the credibility of the life that they lived.
Absolutely.
Long story short, after about 10 years, there were 50 deaf people in the largest deaf congregation in the state of Michigan. And all these people had come to know Jesus and had a faith. And I'm not saying it's only because of my mom and dad, but I will sit here today and tell you they were trailblazers.
Yes, they were.
And what's amazing to me is their extraordinariness was not based on deep knowledge of Scripture. It was not based in the great books in the halls of an MBA program. It was a simple faith in God and a dream and a vision, and actually not being inhibited by their handicap because they knew nothing else. We might have seen them as handicapped, but they didn't see themselves as handicapped. My mom stayed home, took care of us 3 boys, raised us, primarily because my dad said, I don't want you to have to work. I'd like you to take care of the boys. But when I went to college, they didn't have any money still. I mean, we were middle class because of Ford. And I'm thankful to Henry Ford and for business because of the value that businesses bring to people's lives across the globe. Anyway, it's a tremendous story of faith.
How do you think, knowing that about your mom and dad, Rick, how would you articulate that shaped you?
Well, I think you don't come to that realization until you're older.
Right.
So growing up in it, I knew they were different. Their voices were different.
Right.
I've told stories,
Yeah.
in
You'd
different
have
settings.
friends over.
Yeah, and the squeals of the voices that the deaf people were trying to make downstairs were a little strange. I would have times where I would get into fistfights with young boys because they were calling them deaf and dumb, saying mean things to them.
Right.
I remember one time in a grocery store, there was a woman, and I was, helping my mom grocery shopping, and this woman got stuck behind my mom in the cart, and she kept saying, excuse me, and she was in a hurry, and then finally she just, excuse me? Well, I turned around and just looked right at her in the face as probably a 5-year-old. Excuse me, I said, my mother is deaf, she can't hear you. And this lady, that wasn't the right thing for me to do, but she just crumbled. This lady just felt so badly. So there are a lot of those experiences.
That's a good lesson, isn't it?
It's a good lesson for all of us.
Really don't just presume something.
Yeah. But here's another thing, Lisa, that I'd tell you about how I developed. So at 5 years old, I was on the telephone ordering meat for them, talking to plumbers, talking to a variety of people because they couldn't do it. So there was a burden there of, like, I've always felt like I was a parent of my parents. And even still when I look back from a handicap perspective, that was one thing that I realized later that, boy, I took on a lot of responsibility really young, which was a blessing.
I was going to say, you grew up fast.
Yeah, I did.
You grew up fast. You learned things at a younger age
Right.
than
So,
typical.
Because we were in the auto industry, my dad was buying cars all the time. But I don't know, for some reason, and this is probably sound pejorative, but sales car guys,
Yes.
there's a stereotypical reputation for a reason sometimes. And I could just tell them they were trying to take advantage of my mom and dad. And they'd look at me like this little 7-year-old boy going, hey. And I would tell my parents, like, I'd walk out sometimes. It was a fascinating upbringing as I look back on it. But truly, Lisa, during those days, I just felt so loved and so blessed and so cared for. And I had this great family of faith. So my kids today are 6th-generation Christians walking faithfully. And it was a blessing to be raised by them.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Dr. Rick Lytle. Hey, everyone. I want to tell you about something so cool going on right now in the Nichols household. Allie, our wonderful daughter and the inspiration for Something Extra, is competing in the Dancing with the St. Louis Stars event this January. Allie will be the Something Extra for the night, and we need your help. Please go to lisagailnichols.com/vote, watch a video of Allie's story, and get all the links to vote. Each vote is $10, and you can vote as many times as you like. All of the proceeds support the Independence Center, a community-based rehabilitation program for adults with severe and persistent mental illnesses. This is a fantastic organization, and voting for Allie is a great way to support the important work they are doing. And we want Allie to win. Pause the show, go over to lisagailnichols.com/vote, and join Team Allie. So, Rick, talk to us a little bit about your career journey.
Well, going back to the fact that my parents never experienced college education, my older brother did do some schooling, and my middle didn't, and then I chose to do that. So I did an undergraduate in business at a small private school in Arkansas, Harding University, and then I went back to Detroit to marry Jeannie. I told you before, I pursued her for 5 years. I broke her down, and she finally said yes. And we got married, and I started out in Volkswagen of America at that time. The headquarters was in Troy, Michigan. They were just bringing production of the VW products and the Audi products to the United States. So I came in engineering, spent a couple of years in engineering and purchasing, just as a rookie coming out of school. Jeannie and I then both went back and got MBAs. I got the MBA. She worked on a master's in English. And at that point, I had a group of guys start talking to me about getting a PhD, and I didn't know what that was. I just didn't know what that was. So they talked to me about it, and I said, my favorite professors in my schooling to that point were men and women who not only had the pedigree and the degree and the learning, but they were actually out in the market. But I knew I wanted to be a businessman. My whole life, I just loved business. I wanted to be in it. So I worked for 5 more years. We moved to Denver coming out of my MBA program, and I worked in oil in Denver for about 5 years. And Jeannie became a pretty gifted writer at TRW and Martin Marietta. And we loved Colorado, had a great season there. But these guys kept coming back to me saying, we want to build a business school. I will tell you, that was the first time in my life I felt called. It really was. And it sounds self-serving, but in my own little world, I gave up everything. I had a great job. I had a great future. Jeannie had a great job. We loved Colorado. But I really felt like I could make a difference because of the experience that I had at my undergraduate institution. So we left everything, and my family thought I was nuts. And we just picked up, and West Texas is not the most beautiful place in the world.
This is Abilene, right?
Abilene, Texas, at Abilene Christian University, great school. So we went to Arizona State University, and I started working on my doctorate, and Jeannie got another master's degree. I'll tell you an interesting story about that. First day I remember of class, I go in, and remember, my parents are deaf, okay? So here I am, I don't even know what a PhD is, and I'm in a program, and I'm starting a PhD. And the first day, I'm trying to get my driver's license at the Maricopa County, Driver's License Bureau, and the line is forever. And my first class, I can tell
you're not
I'm
going to
miss.
It.
I'm not going to.
You're not going to make the.
But
first
I wasn't going
class.
to get out of line. I was committed.
Right.
So I show up a half hour into this, and I'm scared to death. And I go in there, and the gentleman was an awesome guy. He was not from the United States. I could not understand him, and it was a statistics class, a high-level statistics class. And literally there, I thought, what have I done? I am a nut. I'm going to flunk. My family thinks I'm crazy already. And I've got a wife. It was very, very difficult.
You had a little fear?
I had a little fear there. And what's wonderful about a wonderful spouse is I came back, I remember that night, and I was all pity party and everything, and she looked at me with loving eyes, and she said, you know, we moved all the way out here to follow this dream, and I don't care if you want to work in agriculture or waste management or be a janitor or whatever you want to do, you're getting your PhD. That's what we aim to do. So it's kind of like my dad's mom grabbing my ear. So anyway, we persisted through that, and it was difficult. The PhD it was for me, but it was great. So anyway, coming out of there, we went to ACU because ACU was the place where I felt the call. I had universities like Pepperdine, which is a beautiful university in Malibu,
it is.
coming after me with a job offer, and I knew the provost there because he had mentored me, and I just said no, and we went to West Texas. So we spent 27 years there. We raised our 3 children. Another struggle along the way. We never thought we would have children. We were unable to have children, and Jeannie we miscarried twins. We miscarried 2 other babies. So we didn't. This was another, like, what is going on here? So with adoption ages and all that, but finally we were just blessed with Kelly, and all of a sudden Hannah came, and then Michelle came. So we had 3 girls, and we were blessed to work at the university. We were a college family. I was on campus all the time. It was my life. I gave 25 years of my life there full time, and served as the dean of the business school for the last 16 years I was there. And I'll tell you about a mentor right now that was part of that experience. There's a couple named Dr. Jack and Ann Griggs. And when I came, here's the other thing about that story. I went off to school based on the promises of all the guys that were back in the business school. And my first semester away, after I left everything, they all left the university because there was kind of an implosion with the president and the College of Business dean. So everything was wrong. I was freaked out because I didn't know if I could pass. And this place that I really didn't know very well, they all left. They all left. Right. So when we came back, this wonderful couple had stepped in, and he became the dean. And Jack and Ann Griggs took Jeannie and I literally into their family. My wife came from a broken family, alcoholic father. I had a wonderful family, but Mom and Dad were limited with their handicap. Jack and Ann, even today, I just talked to them last week, out of all the people in the world that aren't my family, they're my family. And they adopted, and Jeannie went to Ann when we had Kelly and said, I really don't know how to be a mom. Would you mentor me? And of course, Ann was humble and said, well, I don't know what I'll tell you, but I'm telling you, they raised 4 great kids, and we knew that. And if anybody's raising 4 great, faithful kids.
How much older were they than you guys?
15
Rick?
years.
15 years. Okay.
Yep. And it's maybe to some people the strangest things, but they're some of our best friends, even though they're 15 years older than us. And we go on family vacations because they brought us in. They just blessed it. In our opinion, we offered nothing. They took us in. Jack helped me as a young faculty member, but he was also a bank president and CEO of pretty large banks in Texas, still is today. And he just took me under his wing. He just worked with me, and they loved on us, and they showed us how to raise kids. And he showed me how to be a professional, how to be a businessman, how to be a faculty member. And then I eventually took over the dean's job from Jack. And I was honored to do that and served for 16 years. And even today, when we go back to Abilene, Jack and Ann are first on our list to get with. And it's been a great blessing.
I mean, he showed you, right?
He
showed
me
you
the
what
way.
you needed to do the job well, right, Rick?
And a lot of people would, at the time, it was interesting, a lot of folks that were younger, I think probably looked at me like, what are you doing hanging out with us? Don't you have friends your own age?
Right.
You know? And Jack would say some things sometimes in the moment, and I thought, that's a little weird. Today, I look back at so many things that Jack told me in his office at 6:30 one night when we were working on a project. I was the associate dean for a while under him. He asked me to join him. And it's just been a blessing. And here's something extra that Jack has that I hope I have. Jack and Ann Griggs are the most positive, encouraging, concept-building people for other people that I know of. They always thought the best of you. They modeled that in their family and their parenting. They were intentional. They had plans. I mean, still today, I have an easel in our house where at the dinner we do, I'm a faculty member, but we do lessons. What's the question of the day for the table? Very intentional. But he pours into people and he thinks the best of people. And there were times in my early life, in my career, I remember one time I was so negative on Abilene, Texas, because to me it was so ugly. And I grew up in the Great Lakes. And I had a student come to me who really thought highly of me, but she came to me and she said, "You are so negative." And I said, Negative? I said, I think I'm a pretty positive guy. She said, you cut down Abilene all the time? You cut down West Texas all the time? She said, some of us live here and grew up here. And so the next day, I went home that night, I got poster board from our girls' rooms, and I took crayons, and I asked the girls, would you build me a sign that says Ski Abilene, even though it's West Texas, there's no
Abilene.
snow. Yeah. And so they did a rainbow, and I posted it above my dean's office door to remind me that this is beautiful and it's a great place to be. And from that day, I was a pro-Abilene guy.
That's awesome.
And the thing, at least I think that I'd learn out of that, I had a lot of leaders that worked around me at the university. It was a big university. I mean, small but big, 5,000 students, 110 years old. So it's a quality place. There were certain leaders on the campus that were so negative all the time. And I would say to them, you'll never have followers if your predominant lead personality is negativity. Who wants to follow a negative leader? If Jesus was negative, I'd be like, I'm not inspired to follow anybody that's that way. So Jack helped me model that. A student at the university called me out and taught me a great lesson. So Jack and Ann were that something extra, and that positivity was certainly something extra that has worked in my favor.
Goodness gracious. There's so many things that are going through my mind, but one of the things, that just kind of triggered what you were saying. So like if you do have areas, or I call them blind spots, you didn't even realize, you're like, no, I'm a positive person, right? You had that blind spot, but you could change that trajectory, didn't you? I mean,
did.
you intentionally put things in place like visuals and things like that to make sure that you changed that.
On the spot. And I carried that farther into my family. So what I started doing every year as the girls were growing up, and again, this is a little extreme, but it's what we did. We would do an annual retreat every year. Just Jeannie and
Your
I.
family?
Jeannie and I and the girls.
Okay.
And I would try to make it fun. We didn't have a lot of money because it's a college professor. But we would go somewhere. We'd do one day, let's say, at Schlitterbahn or one day at SeaWorld in San Antonio. Then the second day was always, we had retreat time. Every year since the girls were little, they've all had a set of goals based on Luke 2:52. What are your spiritual goals? What are your intellectual goals? What are your social goals? And then what are your physical goals? And all of us, Jeannie and I and the girls, every year, we would write our goals, and then we would share them and I'd get them laminated, and I still do it today. I have 2018 goals that I carry with me, and so do the girls. And we would do that, and then we would review how we did, because we were coming up usually to Christmas time in the fall. But I did 360s as well. So I had 3 questions. What should I keep doing as a dad or as a husband to Jeannie? What should I stop doing? And what are some ideas that I could begin doing? Just those 3 questions. And I remember,
so everyone kind of got to evaluate
we all shared,
where you were.
And
Okay.
everybody. I
Yeah.
evaluated them. We did the total
It's a
360, like
360.
corporate America.
Right.
And I remember one time my girls called me out in the review, and they talked about the fact that I was pretty busy at that particular season, and I had made some goals and commitments to them about what it looked like to be a great dad for them. And it was hard to take, but I took that and I changed. There was also a time Jeannie said, I remember I was kind of into it, man. I was speaking in chapel. I was trying to publish. I was teaching a bunch of class. I mean, I was like all in. And I was mowing the lawn one night at 10 o'clock at our house. And I thought, this is out of balance. And I made a commitment that night, and she talked to me about it. And so I've tried. I know I'm still blind, but I've tried, and we do that every single year. And
Well,
we
I
just
think-
helped each other walk the
right.
journey. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's the journey, and it's, we may be working on something today, right? And we can work on that and get through that, and then there's something else. But I think the goal is to always be looking for those things, right? I had a friend say to me recently about, the question should be not how I can be a better wife or a better mother or a better businesswoman. How can I be a better woman? We need to be asking our question that every day. You need to be asking yourself, how can I be a better man, by the way?
Right, absolutely.
But that's the point, right? Is every day we know that, we can be a better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday.
And I think
So I think that's the point.
I agree with you 100%. I would share this. I think you need to look at the long arc. And I would say this, I've tried to teach my girls this and myself, that I do believe that you become just like that, what you're in love with. So Martin Luther said it this way, that upon which your soul relies and in which your heart delights is your God. That's just who it is. But you're crafted, you're forged and shaped by what you love. And so if you love yourself, you're going to become a pretty small package. If you set your heart on things that are grander and that are above, and that are excellent, that are praiseworthy, you have the opportunity to become somebody over the long arc much better than you ever thought you could possibly be, right? With even a simple faith. And I would tell my girls, if they knew me when I was a young man, I fell in love with motorcycle racing. So if you came into my bedroom when I was 15 years old, there were posters all over the walls, guys jumping, dirt flying.
Evel Knievel.
All this kind of stuff. Yeah, but it is that kind of stuff. But what's interesting, what I tell them is, if you took a snapshot of me before I fell in love with motorcycles and then took one 4 years later, I was a totally different man. 4 years later, I had a motorcycle, I had jerseys, I had helmets, I had leather gloves, I had it all because I just was captivated by this thing. And when you fall in love with God, that's what happens to you. You just become more like him. So I've always tried to check my heart and make sure what is it that I'm in love with. And if it gets a little too close to me, then I'm going to become my arc. Yeah, and my arc's going to be pretty small. Yeah.
Wow. So Rick, you're no longer at ACU. You are now the CEO of the CEO Forum.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about the mission of CEO Forum.
The formal mission of the Forum is to disciple CEOs and senior executives of major companies so more employees can experience the touch of God by a Christ-following leader. In essence, we exist as an organization of about 200 right now, 200 Christian CEOs of major companies. So you have to have at least $100 million or more in revenue that you're responsible for, or if you're an asset manager, $1 billion or more. And that's not to say that other segments aren't important, but this is the mission of the Forum and the niche of the Forum because we really believe that we can make a difference for good in our nation and across the globe with men and women of faith who really live that out daily in the marketplace, in the way they treat their employees, the way they shape the values in their companies. And it's an exciting opportunity to equip leaders of influence to change the world. I've been blessed now for the last 2 years to come along and try to help provide leadership for the Forum. I'm still on faculty at ACU, and I direct a center. There was a very nice gift given called the Lytle Center for Faith and Leadership. And so we do Distinguished Speaker Series, and I have a team over there that works a little bit. But my main job is CEO of CEOs.
CEO Forum, yes, CEO.
What's marvelous is to watch when God brings people together in an intentional way over time, just to watch leaders begin to grow and to blossom and to see their call, the leg of the race that they're running, the position that they've got, and the baton that's been handed to them. What are they going to do with that? There's so much good coming out of this organization, and I'm super pumped.
I know you're passionate
about the future.
Yes,
because I feel like our only limitation is me. I just how can I? But the reality is, my only limitation is my surrender to God and to just invite him in to help us do what we need to do. The other thing I'd say about the Forum that I really love, and it's authentic. There are a lot of organizations that do a lot of good things. You could come to our conferences and spend 2 or 3 days with people, and you'd never know what they did because we don't flash job titles. We just put names. And it's an awesome organization, and you're a part of that, Lisa, and you're on our board, and you've been an awesome addition to the board, seriously. And watching your leadership, and I watched you in one of our programs called SLI, Matriculate Through SLI, and I just watched you grow. And you're leading many efforts in St. Louis and across the country. It happened. I saw it happen. And so we're excited about that work and praying that God will bless that. We hope to be at about 500 members in about 4 years, and I think with God's help we can do that.
How many employees? I know you guys have done the metrics on that.
We did a calculation a few years ago. Here's what we came up with. If we had we think there's about 800 Christian CEOs at that level. That have an influence over about 17 million people. And so if we're 20% of that, depending on but we've got the influence over millions and millions of people in the United States. And the men and women that are in this take their positions of influence very seriously, both prayerfully and from a competence standpoint, to lead their organizations well. Because what we want to do, there's a character in the Old Testament named Daniel, and he lived in Babylon, which was a very secular time. And what's cool about Daniel is Daniel served God in Babylon, but he served Babylon for God. So he was a blessing, even though he may not have accepted all of the values there. And that's what we want to be. We want to be as CEOs and leaders in our country. We want to be a blessing to the people of this nation.
So how can they find you? Can you share the URL with our listening audience?
I think it's theceoforum.org. You'll get some information because there's a big privacy wall because of the nature of the clients that we serve, but you can certainly find out about the mission and our work.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a delight for me.
You're awesome,
to sit
Lisa.
across the
Thank you
table
for honoring
from
me.
you.
Thank you for honoring me with this time.
Very good. We'll see you next time.
Our show today is executive produced by Brian Muncie. Our technical producer is Daniel Williams. Something Extra with Lisa Nichols is a Technology Partners production. Copyright Technology Partners, Inc., 2018. For show notes or to reach out to Lisa, visit lisagailnichols.com/somethingextra. Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen.